Hello friends and welcome back. I'm Nick. This is MSFS Flight Plans, the sim community's cozy little corner of all things awesome. Today we're going to do something entirely selfish on my part anyway, that I'm sure any of you northern transplants now living in the south like me will appreciate this time of year. We're going to take a tour of one of my old haunts up along the Connecticut River to enjoy this beautiful fall foliage. I bet it's been a quarter of a century, 25 years at least, since I have seen leaves change, which is just breaking my heart because it is one of the most cherished memories of my youth. So for all of you in the south like me, you're welcome in advance. And we're going to take the freeware Reims Rocket version of the 172, which is available on flightsim.to. And if you haven't heard of this thing before, I can only guess you didn't know about it because it is easily as good as the payware versions, if not better in many aspects. So I'll put a link for this in the video description if you want to check it out. And if you haven't, you definitely should. And at the end of the day, let's see, that looks a little bit cockeyed. Let's see if my camera's good there. Yeah, I think we're okay. At the end of the day, it is a 172, so the startup isn't that much different. Basically, it just has a little bit more power. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this later once we get going. Okay, so we got that good. Give it some mix and some prop, a little bit of throttle, and then we got to turn the pump on for just a few seconds to fill up the tubes, and then we'll fire her up. This is not the live weather. It was getting up to about 30-knot gusts in the air, which was just way too much for this light little thing, so we're not going to deal with that. I just adjusted it to partly cloudy. There we go. We'll leave the window open for a minute. You know what? Let's just shut it because I'll probably forget about it and then we'll be flying around with the window open. Okay, so let's get the avionics on and get our transponder going. We're going to be cruising between 2,000 and 2,500. As always, I've meticulously drawn out this flight plan, which will be included in the video description. And that's a good altitude for this route if you want to take it. Let's get that all the way to altitude mode. Get that on GPS because we will be flying with autopilot, and open our cowl flaps until we get up in the air. Check the barrow. We can get the yoke back. And we're good. Okay, real quick, let's take a look at the Google map. So here we are in the United States, and we've been spending a lot of time in the England, so now we're coming over to New England. And a while back, one of our very earliest flights was around the place where I was born here in Groton, Connecticut. So this is the Thames River, which is spelled like the Thames, but if you live in Connecticut, you call it the Thames River. And here's the Grand River. We're going to be taking this all the way up to Hartford, and we're taking off from just west of Madison at a place called Griswold Airfield, and that is not the town of Griswold, which is somewhere over here. There's the town of Griswold, and if you saw that flight around New London, there's Fort Griswold right down here. So I had to look at why everything was called Griswold. That was an old Connecticut family that had a lot of money, and I think they made it in England raising greyhounds, which is kind of interesting. Their coat of arms has some greyhounds on it. So anyway, the airport's right here, which is now closed. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But we're going to come up this way, come right along the coast, come by Old Saybrook, and start heading on up the river. We'll stay on this side of it so we can kind of see everything out the left side of the plane. Cruise up here by Essex. Awesome little place down there I'll tell you about. Gillette Castle, our only castle on this trip, which isn't really a castle, but I'll tell you about that once we get up there. And then cruise on up here, and then we're going to cut to the west over Middletown, and then up by, which is probably pronounced Middleton. I never actually went there when I lived in Connecticut, so I don't know how they say that. I'm just going to call it Middletown. And then up by New Britain, and then come around the south side of Hartford, circle all the way around the top of it so we can look at everything up there, and then come into Robertson Airfield. The whole trip is about 75 miles in the air, and the sim says it's going to be about 40 minutes. So, we'll see how that goes. This is a pretty quick plane, and the winds may be favorable as we're heading on the longest stretch, so we'll see. Okay, I think everything's good. I'm going to go ahead and just set this for 2,000, and then we'll arm it once we're up in the air because it was having some trouble locking onto that. Actually, I'm going to set it for 2,200, and we'll see how that looks once we're up there. Everything else is good. And our man Chet's with us. He loves fall leaves just as much as everyone else, so he's hopped along for the ride. I didn't even make him pay for any gas this time. This is a treat for you, Chet. So let's see here. I'm going to turn to the left, parking brake off. We'll go ahead and turn our landing lights on since nobody else is out here. So this airfield closed in 2007. It was opened in 1931, and I think it's always been general aviation. And if you look at it on the satellite map, which we will do at the end, you can see, I think this tiny, skinny, scrawny little runway is still out here. But all these fields right here are now soccer fields. And back in the day, this river right here to the next of us, let's see if we can see it. They used to have a little seaplane base down there, which is pretty cool. So that's the Hammonasset River, which is going to come all the way down to the Long Island Sound. Let's get centered up here. And we'll try to get up in the air from this thing. Okay, we're good. One notch of flaps. We already got our lights on. Check the barrel one more time. This is set to GPS. Our transponder is set to altitude mode. Everything else is in pretty good shape. Chet, you buckled in? I'll take that as a yes. Let's rock and roll. Some of the ground terrain, I was trying to adjust it with Rex AccuSeason. With the regular spring and summertime trees, it looked a little bit more normal. For some reason, it looks a little bit cadaverish with the fall foliage. I don't know why. I don't think the color really changed that much, but something about the way it looks with the trees isn't quite right. By the coast, once we get a little further inland, it's not going to be too bad. Okay, so once we get up to 300 feet, we'll bring the flaps in, get the autopilot on, and away we'll go. And then we'll go ahead and pull those RPMs and the manifold pressure back a little bit too. Okay, flaps up, autopilot on, and we'll climb at 700 feet a minute because this thing can definitely handle that. And we'll go ahead and bring that back down to 2200. I don't know why I jumped up one, and we'll arm it. And I don't know why it's not arming it. Let's try adjusting that again. We'll just see if it stops there. If not, I'll just push altitude hold once we get up there. Okay, bring the RPMs back some. Bring our manifold pressure back some. And close the cowl flaps. Landing light off. So even though we couldn't really see it because we just flew across the center of it, Hammonasset Beach State Park is along the coast right back there behind us. That place opened in 1919 and is the largest shoreline park in the state and also one of the most visited since it opened. And just to tell you how much traffic they get through there, 5 years after it opened in 1924, they had 450,000 visitors, which is a lot for the 1920s, I would think. But perhaps even cooler than that, during World War II, they closed it to the public. There's a parking area for it. They use this whole thing as a bombing range, which is awesome. Really cool. And as we come up here, back behind this bay is the little town of Clinton. That was incorporated in 1838, named after former New York Governor DeWitt Clinton. And it started its European-American life in the 1660s as a big plantation south of a little town named Killingworth, which is still a little town just to the north. But their big claim to fame is that in 1701 they started a tiny theological college over there, which eventually moved 15 miles to the east over to New Haven, and kind of became a big deal. Some of you may recognize the name. Today they call it Yale University. So that's where it started, back there in Clinton. Well, we're not climbing at all anymore, so let's see what's going on with that. I think I messed it up fooling around with the autopilot. Alright, we'll resume our climb. Everything's looking good. We're not in any rush to get up there. And we're going to see another little point up here. It's called Hawk's Nest. And when I was researching that, there was just a blurb on the wiki page. It's going to be right behind our pillar. They said it was the site of an old Indian village. They didn't say how old or who the Indians were, but I'm guessing it was probably the Pequots because they were down here by the mouth of the Connecticut River, maybe the Nyantics. But this was it right up here, and it's unfortunate we couldn't get any more furniture. This is called Duck Island. It's a little nature preserve which has a lot of seabirds on it. No surprise. And I am so glad they injected all these sailboats out here, because in real life you'd probably see even more than that. But we're going to have all these marinas right along the coast and all along the river. Lots and lots of sailboats out here all the time. I imagine this windy fall weather, there's even more of it. And man, is it just nice to see all that. So there's where Hawk's Nest is. And the town just east of that is Westbrook, which is fairly unremarkable, but it did pop out one incredibly remarkable David Bushnell, who was born there in 1740. He also studied at Yale, and while he was there, he would go on to invent a little contraption he called the Turtle, or the American Turtle, to give it its full Christian name, which would go down in history as the first submarine ever used in combat, and I'm sure you guys have probably seen pictures of that little thing. And though it was unsuccessful, the Turtle attempted to attach a time bomb, an underwater time bomb, a flintlock-triggered time bomb that he also invented at Yale, to the HMS Eagle, which was moored in New York Harbor in 1776. In reading about that, he tried 3 different times. Of course, it was night, and he had those tiny little windows, and I'm sure they were all fogged up, because I can only imagine how sweaty and humid it was in that thing. But the idea was that there was a little drill attached to the top of it, and he would drill the bomb into it and then swim the thing away from it. But it was so dark, he couldn't tell what he was drilling into, and he kept trying to plow it into the metal fittings around the rudder of the ship, so he never got it on there. Too bad. But the Turtle eventually was scuttled when the Brits captured a ship which was transporting it around, so that's how the Turtle met its demise ultimately. Wasn't sunk in battle, nobody died in the thing, thank goodness, unlike the Hunley during the Civil War. Okay, as we turn along the river up here, we're going to pass the town of Old Saybrook, which is right up in here. It's going to be on the western side of the river. And that was originally a Dutch settlement going all the way back to 1624, which is a long time ago for the U.S. as far as Europeans go. But it was subsequently abandoned as everyone was consolidating down in New Amsterdam, which of course today is called New York City. But its lure along the mouth of the Connecticut River eventually brought people back who got right down to the business of witch hunting. What else would you do back then? In 1661, a trial was held for suspected witches Margaret and Nicholas Jennings, a husband and wife duo. And the trial determined they probably were in fact witches, but the only thing that got hung was the jury. The accused were spared the gallows, which I'll assume was a huge disappointment to the townsfolk. And this area sticking out right here is called Saybrook Point, and this is where the original settlement was, right down there. They even had a fort that was down there for hundreds of years, but they demolished it to make way for a big train yard. And looking at the satellite map, I'm pretty sure they built a replica of the fort, because there's a little square thing down there, but it didn't have a bookmark or anything on it. We might be able to see it in the sim. But they do still have the ruins right next to that of the train roundhouse, which is pretty cool, and we can definitely see that once we come around, so I'll point that out to you. And I think this whole area here is called Fort Saybrook Park. On the end of this thing, of course, we can't see it right now. Well, are we going to stop it? Did it hold? Yep, it's holding. Great. Okay, well, we got the altitude hold. On my test flights, I was just fiddling with that thing the whole time, which was distracting at least. And I like this airspeed. I think we'll probably creep up to around 130 knots, so that'll be good. Everything's looking great. Let's check the barrel again. Looking good. So the train yard is right here. We'll get a bit better look as we come around. And then the fort, once we get past our strut there, is going to be too small to see. It's right about there. Tiny little square thing. I'll show you at the end when we look at the satellite image on little NavMap. But see those things right there? If you got a big screen, you can see them. Those were the spokes of the roundhouse area. And I'm guessing they must have had a bridge coming across here at some point. And up here we're going to see two bridges. Well, where there should be two bridges. The first one, if it was here, which did not get modeled, we'll be able to see the terminal sides of it on each side of the river, is a rusty old train bridge. And this next one, I'm going to give you a guess at what road this is, but I'll give you a few hints. We have seen that, so the train bridge probably went across right around here. We've seen this on pretty much every one of our eastern coast flights, this road, this mystery road. It does run from Maine to Miami, right past my home here in Jacksonville, Florida. Take your guess. Yep, it's Interstate 95. Spent many, many hours and many miles on that road. You see this coloration here? That just doesn't look quite right. When the trees were all green, it looked okay, but something about them being fall colors, not looking quite right. But it's going to look better once we get up there because it'll get more greenish looking. But look at all these marinas. There's where the bridge would be. You can see, just see the ends of it there. But the marinas look good, as usual. Fantastic. This area we're flying over right now isn't much to see in the sim, but it's an area called Old Lyme. And if you're deathly afraid of ticks, you can thank Lyme for that. They named the tick-borne disease after that place when it first appeared in the region in 1975. And boy, there are plenty of ticks in Connecticut. I used to play out in the woods back before Nintendo was invented, and everyone stopped playing in the woods, and we would always be covered in ticks by the time we came back in. Never got Lyme disease, although my grandfather did. Messed his knee up for the rest of his life. And those little deer ticks, the ones that give you Lyme disease, are hard to spot. They look like little poppy seeds. And by the way, if you want to fly your float plane out here, and who wouldn't, we're going to fly directly over two float plane bases over the course of the next 5 miles, both of them on the right side of the river here, the part we're flying over right now. And both can be designated in the sim, so I just want to make you aware of that, and I'll show you where those are once we're done. We're getting a little stuttering, and I don't know why, because this plane's pretty simple, and there's not really any photogrammetry or real heavy terrain out here, so I'm not sure why. I had to turn the graphics down quite a bit, so I'll just try to move my head pretty slow. So right up here on our left is going to be one of my favorite places in the world. It's the town of Essex, which is home to the Essex steam train that'll take you on an amazing cruise north along the western side of the river. And the steam train is right about over. I flew over there. You really can't see the steam trains. It's right here and kind of cuts over this way and then catches up with the river over here. Really a great time. And they got a little museum, a little maritime museum for the Connecticut River right there. I don't recall that being particularly fascinating, especially compared to the steam trains, but they got a few old boats down there. And one interesting note about the town of Essex is that it used to be a major shipbuilding area, particularly for privateers. And during the War of 1812, the Brits did not overlook that fact. On the morning of April 8th, 1814, 136 British troops rode up there in 6 little dinghies and destroyed 28 vessels in what would go down as one of the largest economic losses of the War of 1812. And apparently they worked out a deal with the locals that if they could scuttle the ships, they'd spare the town. And that's exactly what happened. Nobody was killed, and no other structures were damaged. I read a little bit of local lore that said the real reason they didn't destroy the town is that when the British officer came ashore, he met the mayor of the town who greeted him with a Masonic handshake, and that's why he didn't destroy the town. Which may not be true, but it's sure some great lore. Okay, up here is going to be the town of Chester, and there is a great little strip out here that I'll also include the add-on for. Then if you're flying a 172, you gotta fly into it. It's up on top of a little hill. Let's see if we can see it. It's probably right about here. It is a great little trip. We're not going to fly over there and see it, but again, I will link that add-on in there. All the stuff for this is free, by the way. All the add-ons are just fantastic and free, which could not possibly be better. My favorite combo. And another thing we won't see, at least as far as it looks in real life, is a place called Gillette Castle, which is going to be right up here. It's just going to look like a little default building. But if you come up here in real life, you'll take the steam train up here, and it'll drop you off before it turns around right up here, and you can get on a little historic ferry, come right across the river, and go up and visit Gillette Castle, which kind of looks like an old-school castle. But it was designed and built in 1914 by William Gillette, who was a local stage actor who made his fortune playing Sherlock Holmes out here. And apparently he was quite an eccentric, an attribute reflected in the construction of the home, which he designed and built himself. Among its interesting quirks are 47 bespoke doors, each with a puzzle lock to entertain guests who I'm sure were probably desperately trying to get in to use the restroom. And he also designed a precisely arranged series of mirrors allowing him to view his visitors from his bedroom. Supposedly that was intended to keep tabs on everyone so we could always make a theatric entrance to any gathering. So there's where the castle would be. It doesn't look like that, but you should check a picture of that out in real life if you are into things like that. But as a kid visiting the castle in the 1980s, my favorite thing about it was he had a 3-mile circuit for a working miniature steam train that he would drive around there. All the tracks have been pulled up and it's walking paths now. But he left the big train tunnel, which was scary and smelled like urine and was awesome. So I love going out there just to walk through that. Down here we have East Haddam. This is another add-on airport, which is also awesome right along the river. And this is an add-on, this little swing bridge down here, which is animated. And it maybe, if we're lucky, it'll open up while we're cruising by here. We'll see. But that thing was built in 1913, the swing bridge was, and at 899 feet long is possibly the longest of its type in the world. And this is a great looking airport. Once you get down there by it, looks really good. Come on, open up, bridge. Is it just closing or just opening? But all this region out here was originally inhabited by the Mohegan tribe. They're not the last of them. In fact, that was an entirely... Oh, it's opening up now. That was an entirely different tribe called the Mohicans, which lived in upstate New York. But these Mohegans called this area Machimudis, which meant the place of noises, a title gained during a series of earthquakes in the region starting in the early 1600s and spanning roughly 250 years. I don't think they've really had any since then, but that's pretty interesting. So before I tell you a little bit more about the Connecticut River, I want to give a shout out to the modders who made this flight way better than it would have otherwise been. First and foremost is Bagaloo, who designed this incredible plane, and I think it's Mitchell VP that made that little swing bridge. And our arrival airport, which also is going to look great, is built by Windhover. And Rusty Dotson 77, who is the MVP of this trip, not only made a bunch of the other airports that I'm going to include on this, including that one down by the river and the Chester Airport, but has done some of the best photogrammetry work I've seen in the sim. You guys know how awful most of the freeware areas look, where everything's all jagged and discolored and the trees are all messed up. And the files are always like 2 or 3 gigabytes, which kills your performance. Well, wait until you see Hartford and some of the surrounding towns. Really incredible work. So, onto the Connecticut River. I have to admit that I had no idea how long this thing actually was before this flight. I knew it went up into Massachusetts, but I figured it petered out somewhere up there. But it's over 400 miles long. It goes right up to the border with Canada. It ends 300 yards short just south of the border of Canada, which is pretty long. And not only that, but I also learned the state is named after the river. I thought it was the other way around. The original indigenous word for the river was Quinnatucket, which means beside the long tidal river. So that's a little bit of trivia for all you nutmeggers up here. And because the river was so long and most of it easily navigable, it's been home to a lot of indigenous populations going back almost 6,000 years or more. Most notably the previously mentioned Mohegans and the Pequots, who control most of the southern river. So the Mohegans were from about here up north, I think, and then from down here south was the Pequots, and I don't think they got along very well. And those same Dutch who originally set up shop at the mouth of the river eventually made their way up to our destination of what we now call Hartford, building a fort they named the House of Hope in 1623, also very early. And I'll go ahead and break the news to you that the fort no longer exists, so no more forts on this trip. And as far as rivers go, this one's just a baby forming roughly 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. And if you're wondering just how old the oldest river in the U.S. was, well, so was I. They got one down in Virginia believed to be at least 260 million years old, which is really old. Just to drive that home, that's roughly 30 million years older than the first land-dwelling dinosaurs. I don't know how a river can just stay in place that long. Now this jumped out at me and is absolutely fascinating. I had no idea, but Pratt & Whitney is headquartered up in Hartford. We'll see it once we get up there. This is a factory they built. I couldn't tell exactly when, because I just went on the Pratt & Whitney website and they mentioned this but didn't say when it was open. But they build engines for F-35 Lightnings down there. How cool is that? And it looks about like that. The top of it, you know, looks a little bit different, but that's pretty close. So very cool. Right along the river like that. Just a neat spot for a big factory, no matter what you're building. And right around the bend here, we're going to see the Middleton Clean Energy Power Plant. And they had a very unfortunate incident down there in February of 2010. Just a few months before it was scheduled to start producing power. From what I could gather, it sounds like they had a natural gas explosion while they were doing some pre-testing before they opened it. And it wasn't a small one either. It killed 6 people and injured another 50 more. They said they could hear the blast from 10 miles away. That's it right there. And this is another part of it too, so I don't know if they opened that first or this first, but that one appears to be touched up. I mean, that one looks good, but that one has that slight discoloration, which makes it appear that they've touched it up a little bit. Probably Rusty Dotson, who did the town of Middleton, which we're going to see next. Man, we're getting some wind up here. It's only a 4-knot tailwind, but it's kind of jerking us around a little bit, but this is a light little plane. See, I feel like, I mean, in the fall, the grass would be more brown, but I feel like that looks more natural, being more green. So I'll take what we can get. So up next, which will be right over here, is the town of Middleton. And this is the first of the modded up areas. And I just want to reiterate that this would otherwise be your standard default scenery. So if anyone wants to see the right way to do up a city in the sim, here is a spectacular example. One of the things Rusty Dotson said that he did was remove all those photogrammetry trees and just leave the buildings, which I think helped out a lot as far as the visual appearance goes. And we're going to see 2 gorgeous bridges as we cross the river. There's one right here and then another one over here. The smaller one to the south is a rusty old beauty called the Middleton-Portland Railroad Bridge. Portland's on this side of the river. And that one's also a swinger. And that one's going to be open too. And it was completed in 1911 to replace an older one that had been there since 1873. And interestingly, the old bridge was hit by a steamboat called the City of Hartford in 1876, just 3 years after they completed it. And I even found an old stereoscope picture of the wreck, like the boat crashed into it, which was pretty cool. No fatalities, the only injuries was a pilot and an oiler, which is probably something that you don't see on many ships these days. Well, pilots, yes, oilers, no. But it was neat to see a picture of it. And then that larger bridge to the north is the Arancioni, known by the locals as the Portland Bridge. And when that opened in 1938, it was the largest in the state. It cost them about $3.5 million in 1938 dollars, which is roughly $80 million today. Not super expensive as far as bridges go. And Middleton itself was incorporated in 1651 and got its name due to its location at roughly the halfway point to the early colony of Windsor to the north along the river and Old Saybrook down there at the mouth that we already flew past. See that bridge open down there? Doesn't look great? Look at the city. Looks really good. And the early settlers were Puritans who, true to their nature, had no tolerance for bad behavior. Among the many offenses punishable by death were blasphemy, cursing of one's parents, and incorrigible stubbornness. Chet. Yeah. And of course witchcraft. All punishable by death. And this is Wesleyan University that kind of gave this place a shot in the arm because they started... This used to be a big port town. And they started running into trouble during the War of 1812 because of the curtailing of trade during the war, so they kind of lost all their economic power. It was one of the biggest economic powerhouses in the state until then. But then the university came along in 1831, picked things up a little bit. Today the school is among the top 5 employers, along with a couple big hospitals, FedEx, of course. So that's how they're staying alive. And it's just beautiful, so I'm sure they get a lot of visitors just coming to check it out. We're going to head out here just a little bit to look at this neat-looking hole in the ground called the York Hill Trap Rock Quarry, and based on their website, I think they're just pulling mostly aggregate out of this place. But it is a big hole in the ground, so of course we have to see it. The only thing wrong with it, really, is some of these trees right here. In real life, the trees are on this side. They do have some trees growing in it, but they got a nice little pool of water, which I think will be too far away to see. But not bad looking, and it looks like they touched up this area here where they got their little piles of gravel and everything, and some of the milling equipment, which is nice because it's kind of on the outskirts of town. So we're going to head north for just a little bit as we head up to New Britain, and in the meantime I'll give you some additional info about this plane. According to information I painstakingly gleaned from about a dozen sites, it sounds like around 600 of these tricked-out Cessnas were built over a 10-year run that lasted until 1977. And Reims Aviation, the company that was doing that, was a French outfit located in the city of Reims, And for a while, they had the only license to produce Cessnas in all of Europe. And they said they mostly built everything in the U.S., shipped it over there in pieces, and then they put it together out there. And they started out producing regular 172s denoted by the Foxtrot prefix, indicating they were produced in France. So if you look at this in the sim, you'll notice it has an F in front of it. And that's why. And the souped-up rocket with its 210 horsepower Rolls-Royce engine was introduced at the 1967 air show in Paris as a bit of a nut flex by Reims, who was trying to span the performance gap between the standard 172 and the 182. And apparently they were quite a hit for at least 10 years, gaining particular attention amongst the Irish Air Corps, who ordered 8 rockets that could actually launch real rockets, which is awesome. They weren't guided, but who cares? And they kept those babies, the Irish did, in the air for 47 years, finally retiring them just a few years ago in 2019. And if you'd like to get your hands on one of your very own, I found a listing for a 1973 model in England, priced at around £139,000. Check it out. You can have one. Okay, so dead ahead of us is New Britain, whose high school easily has the most impressive sports complex I've ever seen outside of a university campus. And this is another modded up area, by the way. So the sports fields will be, well, they're kind of behind our glare shield now, but we'll get a good look at them. And I don't think they're just using them for the high school, but the high school is using them. I think they do like state championships and stuff like that out here. But it's pretty impressive. They've got a massive baseball field, a normal baseball field, a big football complex. It looks pretty nice. Here they are over here. Here's the fields. We'll get a very nice look at those. And they do look great. In the early 1900s, New Britain was known as Hardware City, with several big manufacturers having headquarters out here. And Stanley of Stanley Tools, now merged with Black & Decker, still has their headquarters way on the western outskirts. We won't be able to see it from here. And the wire coat hanger was also invented in New Britain in 1869, proving these guys really thought of everything. And Chet loves those things. That's why he always has those little mountain peaks on his shoulders when he puts his sweaters on. Check out these fields up here. So there's a little baseball field. This is the huge one that has the big grandstand and everything. Here's their football complex. It looks like it probably has a AstroTurf field, a real luxury. And then here's the high school right here. And I think this is the only high school I could find in town. There was a bunch of middle schools and elementary schools, a couple private schools, but I think that's the main high school out here. Look at this field. How cool is that? Very nice. This big building up here, which is also modded up, is the Hospital of Connecticut. And then just to the north of that, we'll see a big open area where they've got a World War I memorial. Look how nice that looks. Well, on my last flight, the stuttering was a lot worse out here, so this is pretty good. Maybe the cache is doing its thing. There's the big hospital, and out here is where the memorial is. The campus of Central Connecticut State will be up here to our left. We're going to turn towards the northeast in just a second, and we'll see that come into view. And that's a public school that opened in 1849. And it's about mid-size with an enrollment of around 10,000 students as of last year. That's a big hospital. We'll see a few big hospitals up here. But that looks good. There's the big memorial. And the Stanley place, which we can't see from here, it's way on the outskirts of town. It's somewhere over here. There's another big pit mine of some kind. Slowly turn my head. Slowly. Okay, so if we look down to our left, we will see the campus of the university right down below us here. Here it is coming into view. Which is pretty good size for a 10,000 student campus. And it obviously got touched up too. That looks good. Great job, Rusty Dotson, and nice handle. I wonder if that's a nod to the car or the dog. Yeah, now we're getting some stuttering because we're getting close to Hartford too. Pretty cool. They got some nice fields too. Look at that. And now we're arriving at Hartford, which happens to also be the capital of Connecticut. So there's another one we can scratch off our U.S. capitals list. And the first thing I'll point out is right over here. We're going to come around this way, so we'll see everything really, really well. But that is an old airport that they've got out here called Brainerd, which is situated right along the river just south of downtown. And they built that on some cow pastures in 1921. And it was originally serving as the city's main airport until the planes got too big for the runways, which couldn't be extended any further, as you'll see, due to the way the river bends around it. So they got a tiny little runway kind of running this way, and the longer one goes right here, but the river bends around it, so it's about as long as they could possibly make it unless they diverted the river. So after that, they started building Bradley International to the north, and that opened in 1947, and by 1958, all commercial flights had moved up there. And they said the real problem was the DC-3s. Everything could land just fine until they got to the DC-3s, which was a little bit too big for this runway up here. And it sounds like they've been debating about whether or not to close it down altogether since the early 50s, really, with some plans to redevelop it being discussed as recently as 2021. They were going to maybe make it residential or a little commercial residential combo area. But I think for now, it's still open. Look at those fall colors. Just beautiful. I can almost just smell the leaves, hear the rustling under my feet. And by the way, my daughter and I are going to be leaving on Thursday for a trip to see some fall foliage. She's never seen fall foliage in her entire life, so we're heading up to the Smokies. I'll be gone from Thursday until next Tuesday, so it may be a week and a half before we get another flight up. Just a heads up in that regard. I haven't hung it up. I'm going to be out of town. Maybe I'll post a picture of us standing in front of some fall colors once I get up there on our community page on YouTube. All right, directly across the river over here, we're going to see another huge opened up area, and that is the main campus and headquarters of Pratt & Whitney. And it looks like they've got at least 2 decommissioned runways down here, but I couldn't find any history about this site, despite some pretty serious efforts to do so. And I think that's always been Pratt & Whitney. This is a power plant again, by the way. I think Pratt & Whitney has always owned this area, so maybe at some point they were flying or testing engines out here. I don't know. But the runways are still there, and they might have even had more at one point. And they recently built a new building right here, this thing, which is also modded up and looks pretty good. That's called their Engineering and Technology Center, and I don't know where their actual headquarters building is. There wasn't a bookmark for that. And I don't know what they're doing in there either, but there was a lot of sites that sign up for tours of it. And this thing right here, this very colorful roof building, is a Cabela's. What a weird spot for a Cabela's, huh? Right on their property. Pretty wild. But I guess there's plenty of land for it. Heck, they could throw a few more things out here. So here's one runway, and here's another one over here. Both of them have big X's on them. If you know anything about the history of Pratt & Whitney or this location, let us know what's up with that. And as we come around right over here, we're going to see Pratt & Whitney Stadium, home to the Yukon Huskies. And their campus, by the way, is over in Stewars, about 15 miles to the east. And talk about a college town. If you check that on the map, it is literally nothing but the college out there. Nothing else but the college. Of course, this is Connecticut, where everything's pretty close together, but there's no other commercial stuff, residential stuff, nothing. Just the college out there. And I've been out there a few times, too. Look at that. Big place, huh? I don't know what they're building at this one either. I'm guessing it's probably engines. And this thing here is called the Hangar Museum, which is an old hangar. And they've got I think they've got every engine they ever built on display in there. And it looks like they're also using it as a conference center of some kind, because they had a bunch of chairs lined up in there in the internal shots I saw. There's the Cabela's. Look at that. How strange. Very interesting. One of the few big box stores that's managed to survive. And look at this stadium. Looks really good. Up here in Connecticut, college football is not a big deal really anywhere in New England. When I moved down to Florida in '91, someone asked who I cheered for college football, and I was like, what's that? Now we're getting the stuttering. Up here, it was all about college basketball and wrestling. And in upstate New York, field hockey was a big deal. I didn't know what that was either until I moved up to Buffalo. I mean, I'd heard of it, but I didn't know any fans of field hockey. Interesting, the regional differences in sports preferences. Okay, so we've got a lot to see downtown, so I'm going to front load it a bit, and then we'll try to spot everything. First, we're going to fly over Duncan Park, which is another baseball stadium like Dunkin' Donuts, home of the Hartford Yard Goats, an affiliate of the Colorado Rockies. And I don't know why it's named Duncan. Their headquarters isn't out here. It's out in Massachusetts somewhere. Canton, I think, is where they're headquartered. Maybe they just do a lot of business in Hartford. And how about the name Yard Goats? That's what I love about these minor league baseball teams. They always come up with the most creative names. And their mascot is just a goat eating something. Looks like a stick of some kind. And we're not going to be able to see it until we come around to the west because it's so small, but the original State House is right in the center of all the buildings downtown. We'll see if we can see it at all. It's really tiny, but I'll show you where it is on the satellite map when we're done. And that was built in 1796. And then we'll have no problem seeing the current Capitol on the other side. That was completed in 1878. And I didn't realize, also, after living in Connecticut for 8 years, that the Capitol was swapping back and forth between here and New Haven for quite a while. Of course, now it's permanently and solely in Hartford. I think this is Duncan Park right here. Yep, I can see the diamond. That's going to be it right there. And let's just see if we can spot the old Capitol. Nope, it's right at the end of this road right here. It kind of dead ends into it. It's going to be behind these buildings. We'll see if we can see it from the other side. And we've got the headquarters for 2 insurance giants up here. The Hartford, this is their building right here, and then Aetna's, which is a really neat looking building, is on the other side of it. There's the current state capitol right there, and you can see that all the way from the main road coming through town. You can see the big golden dome over there. I don't think we can see the original State House at all. It is so tiny. It's just really tucked down in there. And there's the baseball park. Also looks great. And there's Addons headquarters. Really cool looking building. We'll check that out as we cruise by. And in between the two, the Hartford and the Etna, we'll see the Cathedral of St. Joseph's, which was completed in 1962 after an older one at the same spot was burned down. There's a cathedral, and there's Edna's place. Check that out. And there's Hartford's, the Hartford's. Neat looking cathedral. It's all concrete. I mean, it looks cool from the ground. That's about what it looks like, but the pictures from the ground are really neat. And finally, directly north of Hartford High School, which is right over here, we have the home that Mark Twain lived in for a while in the late 1800s, and Harriet Beecher Stowe's house is also out there. We can't see either of them. They're buried down in these trees over here. But Twain was living out there from 1874 to 1891 until he ran into some debt issues and went over to Europe for a while. But Stowe lived in this place for 23 years until she passed away in 1896. And then way up here ahead of us, we have John Dempsey Hospital. And that was built in 1961, and it's also huge, and I think that one's affiliated with UConn as well. So we're going to come around here. Our airport's going to be right over here, so we'll do our announcements as we're coming in for that. And they got some nice-looking radio masts over here, which I'm sure they use for a lot of VFR navigation as they're vectoring people into the airport. And if we have time, I do have a list of some famous people from Hartford. So let's go ahead and come on down to 1,500 feet. If I can get this thing to work, we'll find out. 1,500, arm it. And I think I just unarmed it. We'll see. I'm just going to keep an eye on that, and we'll do an altitude hold as we get closer. So first and foremost, congratulations to OBS Lynx, winner of our third quarterly flight plan recommendation competition for his flight recommendation up to K2 and the glaciers surrounding it. He's the proud owner of a new $50 gift card to Contrail, and he says he's going to pick up the old 727. I said the only rule is you got to send us some pictures of it on the Discord server once you get it. And if you got some places we just got to check out, I'll put the link to our Discord in the video description. Hop in there, go down to the Suggest a Flight section, load up a spot we got to see. It can be just a region, that's fine. Ideally, if you have an airport to leave from and arrive at, that would be even better. If not, I'll figure it out. And of course, this flight plan, all of the add-ons, which again are all freeware for this one, and our bookmark file will also be included in the video description if you want to fly this just like we've been flying it. Check it out. And the Discord, as I always say, is just a great place to hang out. A lot of cool guys, always uploading and talking about very interesting things. So come pay us a visit. We need to slow way down. On my last flight, I overshot the runway. Can we see it yet? Nope, not yet. So the place we're coming into is Robertson Field. That opened in 1911, which is really, really old for an airport. Okay, I'm just going to adjust our vertical speed once we get to 1,500 because I'm afraid it's not going to stop in time. It doesn't look like it's going to, which is perfectly fine. We'll just hold right there. And I think this one has always been for public civilian use as well. And pretty much everything down here is single engine. As of last year, 94% of the planes based here were single engine. So not a lot of big stuff or fast stuff coming in and out, which is perfect for us. But they did have an incident recently. In 2021, a Citation crashed into a warehouse after takeoff, killing all 4 people on board, and they said the cause was determined to be pilot error. Apparently they forgot to release the parking brake before takeoff. So I'm guessing they probably didn't have enough airspeed and just stalled out. Either that or had a fire in the wheel well or something, but a bad situation regardless. Alright, airport, where are you? Once we get on the runway heading, I'm going to turn the autopilot off. I think that's it, right over there. Yep, that's it. I can see the lights flashing. So while we're coming in here, a few famous people from Hartford. Actress Katharine Hepburn was born here in 1907. John Pierpont Morgan, known by most of us as JP, was born in Hartford in 1837. And a name you've probably heard a lot lately, and probably not before the election, is the famous pollster Frank Luntz from Hartford. Gunmaker Samuel Colt was born here in 1814. And Stephanie Meyer, author of the Twilight Vampire series, from Hartford. And lastly, Mark McGrath, frontman of the band Sugar Ray, was born in Hartford in 1968. And there was a very long list of other people, many of whom you probably recognize, but we just don't have time to get to them all, and I figured we probably wouldn't. Okay, autopilot is off. Let's slow down to flap speed. Landing lights on. And we'll start coming on down here. And this thing seems to want to slide a lot further than you think it would for 172, so I need to keep an eye on that airspeed, 1 notch of flaps, watch our altitude, And there are a lot of static planes in this add-on, so we may get some more stuttering as we're coming in. And hopefully we'll be able to tag the second taxiway, and we'll just pull over there and then we'll take a look at little NavMap. Alright, this is looking good. The cool thing about Connecticut, if you didn't see our original flight, which is very, very different from down here in Florida, one, there's no hills of any kind anywhere in Florida, except up by Tallahassee, there's a few of them. But because this is the region where the glaciers stopped heading south during the last glacial age, there's tons of gigantic boulders all over the place, which is just so cool. As a kid, I used to just love climbing around all over those things, but you don't see any boulders anywhere here in Florida, so I always thought that was really neat. And sometimes they'd be stacked on top of each other, making little caves underneath them. It was just so much fun as a kid to be out here. And one thing I noticed about Florida is that you really can't go in the woods out here. There's too many things that'll bite you and sting you and get in your clothes. So my kids never really got to play outside too much, at least not in the woods. But I spent so much time hanging out in the woods in Connecticut. It was just absolutely beautiful. And there wasn't all the undergrowth we have here in Florida. I mean, you need a machete to get through the woods out here. They have that nice pine straw brush everywhere up there. And because everything is so old up here, when you're walking around in the woods, I mean, you could be a mile from anything and come across an old rock wall, the foundation of an old house, or even cooler, an old cemetery. So imagine being like a 9 or 10-year-old kid wandering around in the woods, coming across something like that. Just really, really neat. There's all those planes down there. Okay, I don't think we're going to hit the first taxiway. We'll probably catch the second one, though. And they'll be done. This is nice from this view here. You can see just how the terrain really looks and how hilly it is. You can't tell from up above it. We're a little high, aren't we? Alright, we got plenty of runway. I think this is about 4,000 feet long. Plenty long for this guy. Yeah, we're getting some stuttering. And down we go. Flaps up. Can we make that taxiway? Nope, we're going to have to hit the next one. And landing lights off. There we go. And here's a taxiway for us. Well, Chet, what do you think? Do you get your fill of the fall foliage? That's a bit of a tongue twister. Oh yeah, we're stuttering like crazy now. It'll only last for a second. I'm such a fan of fall leaves that I bought a bunch of silk leaves just to hang around the house and lay on top of tables and things like that, just to bring me back to the olden days. Alright, parking brake on. And we'll just kill the mix and shove everything down and of course open our window. There we go. Alright, let's see what all we got to look at. There are quite a few things that are little or didn't look quite right during our flight here, so this will be an interesting tour here. Take the trail off. Alright, so the first thing that we saw was the Hammonasset Park, which again we flew right over, but look how big this is. These are all camping areas here, and if you really zoom in, look, you can see all the tents and campers and stuff they have out there. But that's the biggest one in the state, and it's been around for a long time, since the early 1900s, and this whole area used to be a bombing range. Awesome. Oh, let's look at these soccer fields. Alright, if we zoom out, it's obviously springtime, but as we get closer, you can see the nets from the goals for the soccer fields there. And if I could remove this, which we can't, you could see they still have the asphalt here for that runway. Really skinny. Does it say how... Oh, it's just giving us the length. It's not even giving us the width of that, but really skinny. And you can't select it in the sim, even though it's been closed since 2007. So here's Clinton, which is where Yale University started, although it wasn't called that back then. I think it was called Clinton College way back then. And for a while, it bounced over to Saybrook once it got a little bit bigger, and then ultimately wound up over here in New Haven, where it's now called Yale University. Here's Hawk's Nest, which is where the Indian village that I couldn't get any information about was. And I bet they put it right there. That's where I would put it if I was going to make an Indian village, because look at that. It's on a little peninsula. Look at all these marinas. And the water is really not too bad out here because we are in the Long Island Sound, so it doesn't get really, really choppy. Once you come around this, it's a lot rougher, but it's great to do some sailing in the Long Island Sound. And then here's Old Saybrook. So let me show you where the old fort was. See that right there? I think that's where it was. There's no marker in here or in the Google Maps, but here's where the old train roundhouse is. So they had a rail line going out here at some point. I don't know whether they ever had an old railroad bridge or not, but it kind of looks like they might have the foundation of something that used to be over there. Look at that. Maybe. And here's the namesake of Lyme disease, old Lyme. And here's that train bridge that we couldn't see. Look at that. You can definitely see it here, but it just did not get modeled. There's Interstate 95 right there. And then up here we get, so here's one of the seaplane bases if you want to land at that one. That one's pretty short. This one's pretty big, so you can select those if you want to take off there. I guess you can land anywhere you want, but if you want to take off, you could select either of those two. And then here's the Essex train station where you get on the steam trains. And if you're coming through this area, please stop by there and do that. It's so great. And don't just look at them. Take the trip up the river. Go to Gillette Castle, which I'll show you next. And there's the tiny Connecticut River Museum. That little thing right there. I don't even remember ever going there, really, but the pictures on the ground didn't look all that great. So that's where the Brits came in and burned all their ships, the privateer ships. Before we get to that, here's the Chester Airport. And again, I will include the add-on for this. If you're going to fly this, please land there. It is just so cool. And take off there while you're at it. Just do a touch and go or something. Turn around and take off again. It's a cool, cool little airport. And this is another add-on here. And then here is where Gillette Castle is. That's it. Not a very big place. And if you get on the ferry, so here's where the train will dump you off. Somewhere around here, there's the train track. So it'll stop right here. You can get on a little ferry, take a 30-second ride across the river. And then you go up here, and all around this, which you can't see because of all the trees, they have that little walking trail with the train tracks where they used to be. And somewhere through here is that little train tunnel. One of my favorite places in the world when I was a kid. So there's the airport. There's our swing bridge right there. At the massive town of East Haddam. That's it. And then we came up here and saw the Pratt & Whitney plant. And then here is the clean energy facility that had that little incident, the explosion. And this is the other substation or whatever that is that looked like the one that was modded up. This one was not. That one, I think, was. And then we came around here to Middletown or Middleton. And there's the two bridges we saw, which both looked amazing. This whole town looked really good. And here's Wesleyan University, which also looked great. So this Middletown Sports Hall of Fame, that field was also done up. I remember checking that out because I almost thought that was a university, but it's not. I wonder what that's all about with their Hall of Fame. I didn't look into that. And then we came up here to see the big hole in the ground, which I didn't even give the bookmark a title. So you can see they do have some trees growing out of it over here, but there were no trees over here. There were some in the sim, but this thing got modded up for some reason. Thank you for that. And there's a great looking junkyard here, which I also think got modded up because it looked just like that. I love when someone pays attention to a junkyard. Then we headed up to New Britain. Oh, and by the way, the ESPN headquarters, which we did not fly far enough south to see, is also up here just south of our airport. If you're a big ESPN fan, I've driven by this thing several times. They got a bunch of big satellite dishes out here. I don't know if they still do. I don't know if they still use satellite dishes to broadcast, but that was the thing that stuck out to me way back then was all the satellite dishes out front. That's where the headquarters is. So as we came by here, here's the high school with all their incredible fields. And we came up a little bit further. We saw the hospital, the World War I Memorial, and then the university campus, which was up here, Central Connecticut State. That looked great. And then we flew up to Hartford and checked out Baynard, which we can take that one off since we didn't land there. So there's their runway. You can see, I mean, they just did not have any more room. Maybe another 100 yards in each direction, maybe. That was it. And boy, is that a short runway. That might be skinnier than the one we left from. And then here's the Pratt & Whitney plant. So that's that new building they built. There's the Cabela's. And then here's the Pratt & Whitney Stadium. And then Stewart's is over here. Check this out. There's the college campus. And it is just all college. Look at that. Nothing else but college. I imagine these apartments are just for the students. There's nothing else around there, which is just really cool. Once we crossed the river, we saw Duncan Park. And here's the old state building. Look how tiny that is. And it's just so tucked down in there. Really, really hard to spot that. I mean, if you flew right over it, you could probably see it, and I'm sure it's modeled, but really tough to see. And back in the day, the Hartford Whalers, which no longer exist, were a hockey team. We used to come up here and watch them. And in 1990, I saw, to date myself a little bit, Belle Biv DeVoe do a concert in here right before I moved to Florida. It was like a couple weeks before I moved down here. And there's Duncan Park. And then here's the new Capitol building and the Etna headquarters, which looked amazing. The Cathedral of St. Joseph. And there's the Hartford, which did not look amazing at all compared to the Etna headquarters. And let's see if we can spot, you know what? I may have misidentified that. So I was looking at the Trinity College campus and thinking their houses were up here, but that's not it. It would have been closer, so I still don't think we could have seen the houses, but here's Twain's house, and there's the museum, and then the Harriet Beecher Stowe house is right next to it. I don't think we could have spotted those, but that's where they are. So look for that big field there. And if you want to check it out, I didn't research it because I didn't think we'd have time to see it, and it's on the other side of the plane, but I did look when I flew on one of my test flights, and you can see these rose gardens here. That looks kind of neat if you're just looking for something cool to see from the air. And then we came on in after we flew past John Dempsey Hospital, which is huge, and was modeled, looked fantastic, and came in for our arrival. So that's it. It's fall, y'all. Thank you for joining me on my almost hometown tour. Great little part of the world. Absolutely wonderful. If I can get one more flight in, I want to show you where I'm going to go. There's a place way, way up here that I wanted to go to that even has a fort. Here it is, Churchill. I'm going to fly up here and see what this looks like because it is just so remote. I want to see if this is modeled or not, but we may do like a little bush plane flight or something up there because it'd be real quick to post before I go out of town. We'll see. But that was awesome. Even after living in Connecticut for a while, I learned all kinds of incredible things as usual. I'm glad you guys came along, and I cannot wait to see y'all again in the skies. Later.